concludes all operations of the emergency alert system. All stations may now resume regular programming.
For expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
On Thursday morning, I wrote out something about the rising tensions and deliberate actions to cause political violence. On Thursday night, however, Joe Biden gave a speech that may live on in infamy, depending on what actions they take next. However, this is a trend that has been occurring for years at this point, and this is not new. Authoritarians in decline throughout history always divide the people and blame all of their failings on an enemy subgroup within the population. And then, of course, they mobilize state power against that subgroup. Biden started with the quote-unquote medical othering, and now we're here. They seem to be clearly panicked. We wouldn't see such a risky speech otherwise. And it's shocking that this event was actually planned out. And there were people within the government who believed that this was a good idea, who thought the imagery was a good idea. And on top of that, whoever wrote this speech is insane too. The projection tactics used in this speech were unreal. It's hard to wrap my head around how insane all of this is, and how evident these projection tactics are, but there are still many people who do not see it. We are experiencing a distinct ramping up of tensions that are being exacerbated and perpetuated by the establishment. Politicians, media figures, and citizens alike are sleepwalking into a massive conflict, and I don't think they realize what exactly they're getting themselves into, or they do realize exactly what they are doing, which is far, far worse. So, with some heavy speculation, the premise for the night shall be, are they orchestrating a domestic conflict? Yes, we have a lot of things to talk about, but all the different subjects and current events that we will discuss will revolve around one question. And we should really be asking ourselves this more often, especially as things continue to escalate. And that question is, where do we go from here? Let me know what you think though. What outcome or escalation is coming next? Where do you see this going? We have option A, a national divorce. We have option B, their revolution will succeed, entering us into a great reset globalist world. Option C, a civil war. Or option D, could everyone just vote in the midterms and then again in 2024? Have everyone respect the decision, the establishment loses control. Everyone votes these psychos out of power and we revitalize the nation. A full-on kumbaya moment between Democrats and Republicans. Now, I throw that last bit of optimism in there because I still have a lot of hope that people will come to their senses. But how likely is it? I'm not so sure. So, let me know what you think in a comment. But even though I still have high hopes, option D seems really, really unlikely. Seeing as after they lost in 2016, the establishment, the Democrats, the rhinos, etc., concocted a whole narrative around Russian collusion because they couldn't handle losing the election. And then they burned down cities for over 4 years. It's really funny when they keep bringing up election deniers, when they never accepted 2016 either. Overall, though, it's tough to say what's going to happen, but if current political rhetoric gives us any hints, I don't think things are going to cool down. We are in dangerous times. The delusional nature of Joe Biden's speech and the clear demonization of nearly 100 million people is surreal. People better open their eyes and see where this goes before it's too late. Hell, it might already be too late. Power is the establishment's currency, and they are ready to put it to use. Anyway, let's get started with the video. Well, on September 1st, 2022, the establishment came out with one of the most divisive speeches I have heard in my lifetime. This administration doesn't talk about foreign adversaries in the manner of which they spoke about American citizens. It's very, very clear that his sights are set on U.S. civilians, and they are dead set on making them out to be public enemy number one. And I quote, Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundation of our republic. And I quote again, there is no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to the country. Based off this rhetoric alone, they are going to indict Trump. And they are coming out with stories about how they plan to target his lawyers. And I think they're just testing the waters. He accused Trump and MAGA Republicans of being committed to destroying American democracy and called upon Democrats, independents, and what he called mainstream Republicans to quote-unquote confront extremists. This is all so crazy, man. I just don't know how people can't see what's happening. It's all projection. He even said, again I quote, "MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution," which is hilarious. He also said they do not believe in the rule of law, which is an equally hilarious thing to say. And he finished up that statement by saying, "They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence." This is projection. I mean, come on, are we really doing this? You want to talk about political violence? This is footage from DC on the day of Trump's inauguration. This happened all around the nation for 4 years. Well, more than 4 years. But you know, just memory hole that and focus on January 6th only.
You alright, boss?
Police had to push back the protesters so firefighters could get to the flames.
Watch out! Hey, Kingsley!
Small fires had appeared all day. This upped the temperature, which of course was the point.
One demonstrator threw a flashbang grenade back at police. It exploded in an officer's face.
Plenty of tear gas, 6 officers reportedly injured.
They will destroy your limo. You need to leave now.
AK-47, put the cops in piggy heaven.
Come on. As a society, we're here to come together today.
Right in the trash, where it belongs. Yes, sir.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. And they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. The willingness to engage in political violence is fatal to democracy. More and more talk about violence as an acceptable political tool in this country. There is no place for political violence in America, period. None, ever.
So after that, he also asked Americans to quote-unquote come together and unite behind the single purpose of defending our democracy. We had the president calling on his supporters to unite against their fellow Americans. When you call for your supporters to quote-unquote protect democracy, but then also say that half of the country is a threat to democracy, well, what do you think that implies? Yes, the latest move to divide the nation, the latest tactics to demonize nearly 100 million people, and set in motion the final coup d'etat began with a different Biden speech earlier in the week. Now it did culminate with Thursday night's authoritarian dictation. But a few days ago, Joe Biden again threatened his political enemies via the mention of F-15 fighter jets. This time, it was during his Tuesday speech in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And this is not the first time that Biden talked about pitting F-15s against his political enemies either. Back in February in 2020, he said, and I quote, "To those who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots, a great line. Well, guess what? The fact is, if you're going to take on the government, you need F-15s with Hellfire missiles. There is no way an AK-47 is going to take care of you if you're worried about the government knocking down your door." And then he did it again. This is from June in 2021. Biden stepped up the language, adding nuclear weapons to the threats against American citizens. And I quote, "To those who say the blood of liberty, the blood of patriots, and all this stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not watered with the blood of patriots. What's happened is there have never been. If you wanna think you need weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons." Now, it is Biden speaking, so that statement is a little disjointed. But the main point is, when trying to convince people that they don't need weapons to protect themselves from a tyrannical government, saying that the government would just carpet bomb you with F-15s or nuke your ass probably isn't as convincing of an argument as you think it is. All of this really indicates the crazy times we are living in, but it really exemplifies how evil these people are, how malevolent, or even, how indifferent they are towards suffering, as long as it contributes to their hold on power. Corrupt FBI agent Andrew McCabe said on CNN that Biden did not go far enough. I mean, these people are sick in the head. Speaking of CNN, Paul Begala said that the speech indicated that Biden was strong. And I quote, "I've known POTUS for a long time. This is who he is at his core. He's speaking with evident passion and real clarity." Wait. So, based on what this guy said, from a lifelong friend, this speech indicates what Joe Biden is at his core. So basically, Joe Biden is a fascist authoritarian with dictatorial tendencies at his core. Okay then, not the brag I was expecting from a lifelong friend, but okay.
Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
One of the biggest indicators that we are headed for something very, very insane is the fact that in normal political discourse and with, normal humans, not these freaking lizard people, well, politicians would be out trying to cool off tensions. They would not be out there deliberately trying to push the entire country over the edge. This is how you know they are evil, man. Rather than to have both sides of the aisle come together to relay messages of calm, rational discourse, the establishment pushes for violence. And this is exactly why I'm proposing the idea that they are actually trying to start a civil conflict as a pretense to clamp down on society. So, let's try to paint a little picture, a portrait of chaos, deliberate chaos. Okay, this has been happening for a long time. Steve Scalise was shot at the congressional baseball game back in 2017, specifically due to Democrat politicians and the media pushing lies, but they just continue with their rhetoric. We had the riots of 2020, where dozens of people were killed and murdered. We had assassination attempts on Supreme Court justices. We had doxing of their family members. There are just too many of these instances to go through them all. We had politicians bailing out violent political extremists, setting out bail funds. And we also have stories like this too. This just came out. And I quote, "Obama-era intelligence official guarantees $250,000 for bail for her quote-unquote best friend, a New York City lawyer suspected of hurling Molotov cocktails at cop cars." Well, I don't know. I think there's a clear partisan line around this sort of proliferation of political violence and divisive conduct.
I don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized right up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
As we know though, they just continue using projection to try to pass the buck down the line and pit it upon their political enemies. So let's check out some quotes from the media just to see how insane all of this is. And I quote from MSNBC, "There is no alternative right now because the Republican Party today is a fascist authoritarian project." And I quote again, "They are a dime storefront for a terrorist movement." Again from MSNBC, "The Republican Party is no longer a party, but rather a white nationalist movement and a fascist threat to the nation. That's not hyperbolic, that's academic." Man, these people are insane. And I quote once again from MSNBC, "Make America Great Again, a phrase popularized by the former president, was akin to modern-day swastikas or the Ku Klux Klan hood." And I quote from Nancy Pelosi, "Enemies of the state and domestic enemies." And then we had the president call everyone semi-fascist. But this one right here is my favorite quote in the bunch, and I quote from DNC advisor Kurt Bardella, "The Republican Party is basically a domestic terrorist cell at this point, and they should be treated as much." Where do we go from here? These people have lost their minds. I mean, they have to know what they are doing, you know what I mean? Knowing exactly the outcome of this sort of manipulation and demonization, and yet they do it anyway. So the press secretary also began a daily briefing by condemning Republican leaders for their dangerous rhetoric, but also said that President Joe Biden believed supporters of Donald Trump were also a threat and an extreme threat to our democracy, freedom, and the country itself. So their only supposed crime was that they don't vote Democrat. So the shockingly stupid part is how she started off by blaming others for dangerous rhetoric, and then finished off her prepared statement with dangerous rhetoric. This is all insane. If you can't see the contradiction, or rather, that they are doing the exact thing they are accusing others of doing, then I don't know what to tell you. However, as we all know, this sort of targeted language and the precipitous attempts at demonizing their political opposition has been occurring since 2016, and it hasn't stopped, it just keeps getting worse. Again, there are so many examples of this that it's kind of pointless to detail them all. You have to have some kind of malfunction to not see what's going on. So, overall, the question is, where does this go? Where do we go from here? Will everyone come to their senses and actually contemplate their actions? Well, if typical human behavior has a say in it, then no, this is just going to escalate. The crazy part is, I don't know, really, it's all very, very strange. But this week, we had a lot of media figures and even the White House say that all Republicans are fascists, or semi-fascist, just to give themselves a little breathing room in case they had to walk back those comments, you know? I didn't say they were full fascists, I said they were semi-fascists. See, it's not as bad. But they did not walk back anything though. Instead, the media began showing segments like this.
Chapter which is leading us into the election, this fight for the soul of our country, the fight for the soul of democracy. We are watching right now a very radical and extreme Republican Party mirror what we have seen in other places like Nazi Germany, like other places like the Bolsheviks. We have seen this playbook before. We have seen a ruling party try to use things like propaganda, try to silence the free press, try to restrict what women can do. We have seen this playbook before, and it always ends disastrously for the majority of people that are subjected to that. That's what the warning signs are that we're seeing from the president right now. He is ringing the bell that we need to check in, pay attention, because this is a very dangerous line that the Republican Party is under full embrace of autocratic ways and means is nothing but disastrous, and we have to stop.
This is just unreal. But my point was, there are many who, and I am actually one of them, who believe that the establishment are the ones perpetuating fascism, with the end goal being some weird version of technocracy and corporatism. Now, I think there are distinct signs that the establishment is in fact doing this. And I know, you've heard my spiel about this many times, but they are merging with the private sector through the public-private partnerships, the UN model. They are using big tech as the control arm of their regime. This is corporatism. Corporatism equals fascism. Combine that with the social authoritarianism, the censorship campaigns, the persecution of individual citizens on the individual level, discriminating against people because of their political views. I mean, the intel agencies are doing the bidding of the establishment, acting as the Gestapo. I mean, what can I say? When I take a look at what's happening, I mean, it does seem to fit the bill of fascism. And for those saying that the fascists are on the right side of the political spectrum, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the definition of fascism does not align with individualism, limiting federal government, maintaining separation of powers, blah, blah, blah. I mean, what are we even talking about here? Of course, libertarians and conservatives aren't the ones perpetuating fascism. Now, a form of populism, sure. But fascism? I don't think so. It's projection. These politicians, the press secretary, the think tanks, the senators, the representatives, the aides, and yes, even the administrative state, they all know exactly what they are doing. None of this is by accident. However, this is the broader point. Everyone is pointing at everyone else, claiming that they are the ones pushing some form of authoritarianism and are the ones that are hell-bent on power. So, where does this go? Nowhere good. Now, all of you are aware of the games being played. However, there are a lot of people who simply do not recognize the strings that have been ceremoniously attached to their minds. They don't see that they are being used like some strange marionette on the stage of politics, being manipulated and pushed into that delicate position with deliberate intent. Now, in a lot of cases, historically, a civil conflict would help solidify the revolution. And if you think about it in an operational sense, as long as the conflict was pushed along by some entity, they could control the outcome and the response. When conflicts happen organically, without much oversight, and certainly without the gentle nudging, well then they become much harder to predict and control. This does seem rather obvious, but we should also keep in mind that the CIA has perfected this sort of orchestrated civil dispute to initiate regime change. Now let's say that we are in stage 1 of the orchestrated civil conflict, a psyop on the citizens of the US. They began after the 2016 election, linking treasonous allegations and made-up accusations of being a Kremlin spy to the political figure of the opposition. Linking the leader of their political foes to a foreign adversary imprints malleable minds with the initial distrust. However, they also began othering average voters. It began with the deplorables, linking right-wing support to Russian propaganda, etc. The Department of Homeland Security changed focus of domestic terrorism to fit with anyone who disagrees with the establishment. Everything from questioning the election process to questioning lockdowns was included. It was pretty ridiculous. We have seen repeated attempts to tie Republican voters, and really just anyone opposed to the establishment. Yes, this includes you, libertarians, independent voters, populists, and even anarchists like Michael Malice. However, my point is that they are tying all of these non-establishment ideologies to language that was typically levied against terror organizations like Al-Qaeda. This is not good. Now, we may be entering stage 2 of the orchestrated civil conflict. So, of course, rhetoric continues to ramp up as we have talked about, and this would be continuous throughout every stage. But then we got this weird quote-unquote leaked video of Patriot Front. So, the quote-unquote leaked video, the rising tensions, well, it all seems to be coming to a boiling point. And it does seem to be orchestrated. It has to be. There will be some catalyst moment. The Fed boys will be dressed up as right-wing extremists, and they will do something. Perhaps little fights break out between the feds and, of course, their other statist group, Antifa. I mean, who knows? I'm just making up a scenario. But whatever happens, if anything happens, the government will move in quick with the iron fist of the state. The media, of course, will run with the narratives. The mockingbirds will get their messaging. They will focus on one subsect of the population. They will generalize the rest of the country. And of course, they will lump them into the quote-unquote enemy group. And then we will finally get to where we are going. They will clamp down with the full power of the federal government. Yes, their grip around society will tighten, using the excuse of, we just need to keep you safe from domestic right-wing extremists. And that will be their motive. Now, there could be many stages between where we are now and the final outcome, but it seems to me that they are deliberately trying to cause some sort of domestic disturbance as a pretense to grabbing complete control. With the media in their back pocket too. The real insidious aspect is that once they declare that a large uprising of right-wing terrorists occurred, despite the truth in it or not. The media will print the narrative, and that false narrative will live on. Future generations would learn about the attempted overthrow of the government and never really know the truth. Yes, this would give the establishment their perceived, justified reason for their consolidation of power, and if you think about it, it really wouldn't be that hard to do. The country is in a precarious spot, and all it would take is a little push to set things off, and then the rest of their agenda can move forward. If you take into consideration things like January 6th, how the FBI framed Trump as a Russian asset, how intel agencies routinely cover up crimes for the establishment, and how the media backs everything that the establishment does. They even have big tech, massive conglomerates and corporations co-opted into their plans as well. They have all the necessary pieces to legitimately implement something like this. They have all the necessary pieces to orchestrate political violence in order to use it to their benefit. Now, with those corporations, the lure of power and limitless economic growth gives more incentive for corporations to side with the establishment. By merging with corporate interests to meet their Agenda 2030 goals, these corporations, for example, have a direct benefit to being involved with this agenda, and they have their greedy reasons why they would participate in such a deception. They have the foundation for their centralized technocracy already set, and really all they have to do is deal with the pesky opposition. Framing them as violent extremists could do the trick. Now, okay, some of you may be thinking that this is ridiculous, and that I've gone off the deep end for even contemplating this scenario. Well, I have two things to say. One, get off your high horse because speculating about crazy shit is fun. Number two, on a more serious note, it's easy to forget the fact that trillions and trillions of dollars are on the table right now. Remaking the global economy is a massive project that they have already placed tons and tons of assets into. And look, they just aren't going to scrap it because of political opposition from the masses. They are going to try to manipulate, orchestrate, or force this through, one way or another. It is such a massive agenda. We seem to forget. The consequences of this agenda will reverberate throughout the next century of human development, and we all seem to get stuck in the immediate. People on the global stage are planning 100 years into the future, and are planning a transhuman future. They openly talk about this. So, on that note, let's move away from solely domestic issues and talk about this in relation to global events. So, where do we go from here? The global establishment, the Davos crowd, and the World Economic Forum shills need to have the US involved with their plan for a Great Reset. It is imperative to the completion of their project. You simply cannot have a world order without the US being involved. So there is a direct motivation for global interest to meddle with US domestic affairs. Now, we are seeing a lot of ramifications within the US due to these global policies. The same ones affecting Europe right now with their energy crisis.
These policies that are ESG driven and morally driven, that we should convert everything to alternative energy tomorrow, are going to end up starving the poor children of the world. Like it's and killing many of them. So it's counterintuitive that could actually happen, and that's what we're seeing, Melissa, with the prices at $1,000 a megawatt hour, 1,000 euros a megawatt hour. You know, you're going to see real problems in Europe. I can't believe it's not on the front page of every paper every day.
Now, I got a little advice for that guy. He should be checking his brake lines from now on. He just got on the shit list. So in California, they told people to stop cooling their homes and that they couldn't charge their electric vehicles. So let me get this straight. They force you to get an electric car and then tell you that you can't charge it because the power grid will fall apart. So yeah, that's the future. Total control over your ability to travel. But in regards to the quote-unquote Internet of Things that we have talked a lot about actually. So thousands of V-Cell customers in Colorado tried adjusting their thermostats on Tuesday when they learned that they no longer had control over the temperature of their house. This is the smart grid, the Internet of Things, that will soon include the Internet of Bodies. Now for this video, I don't really want to get into the dangers of having smart tech implanted within your body, of which could then be theoretically controlled, changed, or altered by government agencies. But just know that it is possible, and do not be naive about that. Anyway, all of this is connected to this global agenda. Recently, Emmanuel Macron said that this is the end of an era, the end of abundance. Ah yes, certainly, this will be the end of abundance for the average person, but certainly will not affect any of them, because this is how it works. We have a clear two-tiered system. This is all about remaking the economy, which of course, via the global economy being directly linked to fossil fuels, the entire world would have to remake the global energy market. And this leader from the European Union, a World Economic Forum member, came out and said this is exactly what is happening.
The skyrocketing electricity prices are now exposing, for different reasons, the limitations of our current electricity market design. It was developed for under completely different circumstances and completely different purposes. It is no more fit for purpose. And that's why we, the Commission, are now working on an emergency intervention and a structural reform of the electricity market.
Or, another way of putting it, anyone living in Europe will have consistent blackouts for the foreseeable future. Good luck with that. So she said that they are working on the structural reform of the electricity market. Now again, one of the ways that this is occurring is through the war in Ukraine. They aren't perpetuating the war out of some moral cause, or because they want to stop Russian expansion into the region. I believe they would have already completed a negotiated peace if that was the case. They can use the war as the reason for the collapse of the energy market, which would provide them with the opportunity to reset the economy. This clip has been making the rounds and is a perfect example of this.
But if I give the promise to people in Ukraine, we stand with you as long as you need us, then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine. And this is why, for me, it's important to be always very frank and clear. And this means every measure I'm taking, I have to be clear that this holds on as long as Ukraine needs me. We are facing now a winter time where we will be challenged as democratic politicians. People will go on the street and say, we cannot pay our energy prices. And I will say, yes, I know, so we help you with social measures. But I don't want to say, okay, then we stop the sanctions against Russia. We will stand with Ukraine, and this means the sanctions will stay also in wintertime, even if it gets really tough for politicians.
Yes, a German foreign minister pledges to continue supporting Ukraine, and I quote, no matter what my German voters think. Now, can you imagine a politician openly saying that she will defy and directly hurt her own citizens for the benefit of a nation that she does not represent? That's crazy. However, do you know who that is? That is Annalena Baerbock. She is a young global leader and a Klaus Schwab devotee. Aren't you surprised? Of course not. Anyway, so let's continue this with the next section. War for the sake of the agenda. So, Pope Francis declares that mankind is experiencing the outbreak of World War III. Yes, we are, and it's orchestrated and exacerbated by the global establishment. See, global war is just going to result in more surveillance, economic uncertainty, and the collapse of systems, including food distribution, the energy sector, and it offers them an opportunity to be the quote-unquote saviors. And through that, they will introduce their technocratic system. It's all in pursuit of total control. Okay, so they need the US to be involved with this global reset. It's the only way. Here's a few things to think about though. Are the Russians, China, Iran, and the various other nations that have already signed on to their newly developed economic bloc? I mean, really, are they involved with the Great Reset initiative? I don't know, it's hard to say. Vladimir Putin, for example, was one of the first young global leaders, graduating in the same class as Bill Gates and Angela Merkel back in 1992.
Even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for President Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the world.
Russia was directly involved with Cyber Polygon, the cyber pandemic simulation that Klaus Schwab started. And then, of course, China is leading the technocratic control agenda, in regards to their own placement of smart tech, facial recognition, QR code or digital ID tech. And they have really ramped up their own domestic surveillance implementation. Is China involved with the Great Reset? Is a really interesting question, because we know that China has their own grand plan to finish, ironically, 1 year before Agenda 2050. China's plan is called China 2049. They plan on being the dominant superpower. They plan to have control over the entire world. Of course, we know, I have to be a little careful here. Sorry to the alt media people, but gotta tiptoe around some stuff here due to the authoritarians in big tech. But we know that the quote-unquote medical predicament was in fact developed in China. We know that the military games took place on the very same day as Event 201. And we know that after those military games, China stopped domestic flights. But they did allow international flights to leave China, resulting in the global spread. So I believe we could logically assume that this is a planned effort. Is it a coincidence that Klaus Schwab wrote the Great Reset book to coincide with the global medical event? Was it a coincidence that the title was, I won't even say it, but just take a look on the screen. Is it a coincidence that Klaus Schwab said that this particular medical predicament offered a unique opportunity to remake the world? Or was it all done to jumpstart the reset? I don't know. The fact that the United States was funding these projects certainly raises some red flags though. What I do know is this. Let's say that China is involved with the Great Reset and are just doing their part to get this agenda pushed forward. That this is all a grand plan. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you shouldn't trust China. They openly talk about their global geopolitical strategy and how it includes signing onto global agreements, letting other nations hurt themselves economically, and then China just doesn't go along with it, and they never follow through on their end. Which is why, for example, the Paris Climate Accords, this time, they decided just to exempt China from any enforcement of environmental goals. They claim that they must start in like 20 years or something like that, but when the time comes, China won't do it. They want global dominance. They are weak economically right now, and are certainly not going to dig themselves a deeper hole just to gain brownie points with the liberal elite. Now, a lot of people are speculating that China's current fiasco, the blackouts, the tightening of restrictions on their citizens, the insane QR code digital ID policing initiatives that are going on right now, people are saying that it's all in preparation for when they declare war, which is, increasingly, seeming more and more likely. Not only are we still sending billions and billions to Ukraine, but we just started sending billions and billions to Taiwan. Something is going to happen in that region. Now, Taiwan said on Wednesday that it would exercise its right to self-defense and counterattack if Chinese armed forces entered its territory. They said this as Beijing increased military activities near the democratically governed island. Taiwan defense officials said that China's high-intensity military patrols near Taiwan continued, and Beijing's intention to make the Taiwan Strait, separating the two sides into its inner sea, would become the main source of instability in the region. Taiwan has also complained that Chinese drones repeatedly fly close to its small groups of islands near China's coast. The military would exercise the same right to counterattack Chinese drones that did not heed warnings to leave Taiwanese territory after posing threats. Now, Taiwan actually fired at Chinese drones for the first time on Tuesday. And this came right after the Taiwanese president ordered the military to take strong countermeasures against what she termed Chinese provocation. Now from there, US warships and those from allied nations such as Britain and Canada have routinely sailed through the Taiwan Strait in recent years, including 2 US Navy warships last week. We have talked about the military and economic alliance between Iran, China, and Russia. Well, in that regard, things are also continuing to escalate. Yes, Iran began supplying Russia with military drones to fight in Ukraine. And on top of that, Iran is continuing to enrich uranium in the hopes of developing nuclear weapons. That is going to be terrible if that's accomplished. So there is one thing that I believe we need to keep in mind as well. Let's say that a domestic event does occur in the United States, either orchestrated or not. The destabilization of the United States would provide a perfect opportunity for the newly formed Iran-China-Russia bloc to make their move. It would be incredibly naive to believe that they wouldn't pounce if something catastrophically destabilizing happens here in the US. Now, let's add in some of the global protests going on right now as well. Germany is protesting, the Netherlands, of course, are still protesting, Sri Lanka is still going at it, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. Rightfully so, I might add. Okay, so my point is, we may want to ask ourselves, what is this going to look like when it all comes to a head? Which it will at some point. People in the United States are starting to realize the extent of this agenda, and as this agenda continues to roll out, more and more people are going to reject it. Okay, so with that in mind, and if that is the case, which I believe it is, and surely the establishment understands this, so maybe they do actually have to orchestrate a domestic disturbance soon, before the mass protests occur because of the terrible Agenda 2030 energy policies. It appears to me that they need some event to act as the bridge to their authoritarian takeover. Now, global unrest is going to continue as well, so overall, we will have multiple citizen-led revolutions occurring. But then we have to take into account, it would be a perfect time for, foreign adversaries, the rival economic bloc that is emerging, the Russia-China-led group to assert their role in the remaking of the world. Just think about this. We could have multiple civil wars occurring between various political groups vying for control at the same time as a world war. It sounds crazy, I know, but it all hinges on the question, is every nation really involved with this Great Reset agenda? Because if they're not, there will be global conflicts as the power vacuum appears. I think this is common sense, but who knows, maybe I'm crazy. I kinda doubt it though. However unlikely this scenario is, although I feel as if it's very, very likely, it's about damn time we collectively take a look at where we are heading, our current political climate, and the brewing violent sediments. I mean, it is beyond time that we start looking at where this leads us. Where do we go from here? I would like to know what you think. Is it orchestrated? Are we headed for a civil war, a national divorce, a revolution by the people? Or will the current establishment revolution taking place win out? Will we have to contend with all of this plus a world war as well? Let me know what you make of the chaos. We can tell, based upon what they openly say, the objective is to collapse the economy, to starve people out, to remove cash, to remove energy, to remove free will. So they can build back better using a programmable digital currency, net zero. More importantly, to reprogram us. All of humanity now stands on a dividing line. The main question, I guess, is what are they willing to do in order to achieve said goal? With a price tag in the trillions, I wouldn't put anything past them. Once again, this is Heliowave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. However, as always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and of course, I do hope you have a good night.